Yeah, microphone check, 1, 2. What is this? It's B. Michael here with Shifting Paradigms Business. And we're live. That's right. Today is Monday, November 7th, 2022. I'm here at the W.E.B. Du Bois Learning Center at KUAW Radio, Knowledge, Understanding, and Wisdom, brought to you by the Black Family Technology Awareness Association. Got my man Baba G on the ones and twos, always keeping it up and holding it down. That's right, Shifting Paradigms. We're all about stimulating critical thought in order to realistically redefine our narrative and positively reshape our reality through dialogue with self-determination. That good Kuji Chagalia. We do got Kwanzaa coming up too very soon. Yeah, that's right. But hey, I want to dive right into this tonight. You know, the paradigmatic tonight is called Israelite paradigmatics. We just gonna call it what it is. Because of course, you know, everything is abuzz with what Kanye West and Kyrie Irving has been talking about, right? In terms of identity. Who are the children of Israel, right? And I want to preface and say this. I am a proponent of understanding Israelite ancestry amongst African Americans. Not saying all African Americans are Israelites, but there are Igbo populations and other populations from West Africa that have gone through migratory routes from East Africa, from Israel into the African continent, the darker continent, and have been taken from there, prophetically speaking, historically speaking, okay? We'll get into some of that shortly. But it's so interesting because, you know, now that this is just becoming more prominent, now this is receiving more press, right? It's so interesting because I know for myself personally, and I can speak for some of my other brothers who I came into consciousness with about being of Israel, that we've experienced the same backlash, and it's been from our own people. You know, I remember going to poetry readings where we would be censored, you know, for making proclamations. Of course, you know, we're making some very bold pronouncements, though. You know, we're talking about who we are. We're talking about the deceptions that we've suffered from because of religion and what organized religion has done to us and how it has kept us from our identity and kept us from our culture and kept us from true consciousness. And it was met with resistance. It was met with opposition. And this is from, again, our own people who have claimed to be woke. But now that it's coming out, you know, they're like, oh, yeah, woo. But you wasn't there when it was being said from, you know, from the regular folk, you know, from your brothers and sisters. And that's where prophets come from. Prophets come from amongst your brothers and sisters. And I know personally, you know, my journey started like in 97, you know, in terms of dealing with a search for identity, dealing with a search for meaning, dealing with a search for purpose. And when I found out, you know, initially, that these feast days, these holidays had nothing to do with scripture. That was an alarm. That was a flag. When I found out the Mashiach, the Messiah's name, wasn't Jesus Christ, that was a flag as well. And then when I found out who we are according to prophecy and historical documents that deal with Deuteronomy 28 and the signs that would be left on the children of Israel that don't fix itself to any other people historically, but so-called African Americans. It was like that was it. I know who I am now. Okay? And so, you know, that acceptance of who I am was met with resistance by others. This is including from family members, including from friends, including from community members that was like, you crazy. You were dismissed. You were considered hateful. You were considered crazy. Why would you say such things? Well, you must not. You know, and it was just really dealing with, we can say in our early beginnings, we dealt with a lot of indignancy. We were indignant. We were hot about what lies we had been told. And because we were told lies, it was like, you know, I ain't coming with love in the sense that, you know, for the institution which we are now exposing. It had nothing to do about the individuals. We were attacking principle. We weren't attacking personal matters. We were attacking principle, which is a major difference. And so this is what you can see what Kanye West and Kyrie Irving are doing. They're going after institutions. They're going after systems. They're going after historical, like, recollections of who people are. They're not attacking individuals. You know, they're attacking institutions, as they should be, right? And so now that they're being met with that resistance, you know, they're being labeled anti-Semitic. But what Kanye and Kyrie are saying is so true. How can we be anti-Semitic when we are in fact Semitic? When you look at Semitic in definition, and you take the languages of the Semitic languages, the Semitic language is what you consider an Afro-Asiatic language. It is an Afro-Asiatic language, okay? It is shared not only with Arabic, it is shared with Amharic, an Ethiopian tongue. It is shared with Tingika. I can't say it right now. I can usually say it, but it's just not rolling off my tongue tonight. But it's another Ethiopian tongue, Ge'ez. It's shared with many other, and it comes from a root of Bantu languages. The Afro-Asiatic tongue, when you look at the language family, comes from a Bantu, Niger Congo root. That's the root. And so it shares cognates with many different cultures on the west coast of Africa as well, and on the east coast, okay? And so when you're dealing with this, you have to look at it at its root. And this is what we're going to do tonight. We're going to take this to a root. We're not going to deal with any personal opinion, you know? And we want to show that what Kanye and what Kyrie are saying are in fact true, not only from scripture, but from sources that are veritable and reputable, okay? I want to just start with scripture. We're going to just dive right into this, because this is the best way to go, is to dive into this. And of course, do feel free, you know, to call in, to make comments. The call-in number, if you do want to call in, is 816-599-6893. If you want to call in, we got a good hour here to go in. And so I have several articles and some other periodicals to share in regard to what Israelite paradigmatics is going to be about tonight. But Genesis 50, we're going to start there, because one thing we want to do is show where scriptures demonstrate that Israel had a phenotype of what you would consider melanated, right? So this is during the burial of Jacob. This is at the last chapter of the book of Genesis. You're dealing now with Jacob being escorted out of Israel upon his request to go back to the land of Canaan and be buried at the cave of Machpelah with his ancestors. Okay, this was a promise that Yosef, or Joseph ben Yaakov, the son of Jacob, made in order to bring him back to the land of promise and not be buried in the land of Egypt, okay, which was their bondage and their captivity eventually. But it says this is verse 4 through verse 11. It says, and when the days of weeping for him were past, for Jacob, when they were past, Yosef spoke to the household of Pharaoh, saying, if now I have found favor in your eyes, please speak in the hearing of Pharaoh, saying, my father made me swear, saying, see, I am dying. Bury me in my grave, which I dug for myself in the land of Canaan. And now, please, let me go up and bury my father and return. And Pharaoh said, go up and bury your father, as he made you swear. And Yosef went up to bury his father, and with him went up all the servants of Pharaoh, the elders of his house, and all the elders of the land of Mitzrayim, or Egypt, or Kemet, and all the house of Yosef, and his brothers and his father's house. Only their little ones and their flocks and their herds they left in the land of Goshen. And there went up with them both chariots and horsemen, and it was a very great company. Now this is where it gets deep. And they came to the threshing floor of Atad, which is beyond the Jordan, or Yarden. And they lamented there with a great and very heavy lamentation. And he observed 7 days of mourning for his father. And when the inhabitants of the land, keep in mind, Canaan land is Hamitic land. We'll talk about that very shortly. Canaan is a descendant of Ham, okay? He's a Hamite. Canaanites are Hamites. And when the inhabitants of the land, keep in mind, Mitzrayim are also Hamites, according to scripture. Egyptians are Hamites, according to scripture. These are African people. These are Nubian African people. And when the inhabitants of the land, the Canaanites, saw the mourning at the threshing floor of Atad, they said, this is a grievous mourning for the Mitzrites. That is why they call the name Abel Mitzrayim, which is beyond the Jordan. And I bring this last verse up again. This is a grievous mourning for the Mitzrites. They could not make a delineation between Canaanites, between Egyptians and Israelites. Because you remember, all of Joseph's house and his brothers and everybody with them, except the little ones, went to bury Jacob, Yaakov, in the land of Canaan. And they were accompanied by Mitzrites. They were accompanied by Mitzrites or Egyptians. And so when the Canaanites saw this contingency of people mourning, they couldn't make a distinction between the Israelites and the Egyptians. What does that say? Especially during this era here. Because keep in mind, the lightening of Egypt came about during what you would call the Seleucid period. This is during the Grecian period. This is during the age of Alexander of Macedonia. The Ptolemies. King Ptolemy is who brought the Euro presence into Egypt. Prior to that, Egypt was Nubian based. You had kings and pharaohs from Nubia, Ethiopia, right? Somalia, from Kenya. You had also from Egypt as well. But you had the darker hue that was ruling in Egypt, hands down, unquestionably, during this particular era, okay? And they came from Mesopotamia. In fact, the book of Jasher, which is one of the extra-canonical books in Scripture, speaks of the first pharaoh, Rikayon, being from Mesopotamia. But guess who was in Mesopotamia? Cushites. The Sagiga people, the Blackheads, are the original inhabitants of the Euphrates Valley. Okay? And if you want to get into that some more, there's a couple of books. You can read Black Athena. I forgot the author's name. It's not coming to me. Martin Bernal, Black Athena. And then you want to also read Anacalypsis by Godfrey Higgins. Those are two classic books that talk about the further you go back in history, the darker history becomes. And that is meaning when you're dealing with a melanated people who are the fathers and mothers of civilization. So again, when we look at Israel at its root in Genesis 50, and this is now you're dealing with the tribal aspect of Israel. They haven't become a nation yet, formally, okay? You're dealing with the familial lines of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, and now you have Jacob and his 12 sons and their children, 70 plus, because now they went into Mitzrayim as 70 people, and now they're starting to multiply, because Jacob dies, Yaakov dies, right? And now Yosef brings everyone with him to bury Yaakov, Avinu, our father Jacob, back into the land of Canaan, and he brings Egyptians with him, and now the Canaanites see them and like, this is a great mourning for the Egyptians, not for the Israelites. They couldn't distinguish them. What does that say? Paul, in the book of Acts, is later mistaken to be an Egyptian of Tarsus, Saul of Tarsus, who's known as Paul, the Apostle Paul, is also mistaken to be an Israelite. An Egyptian. But let's go ahead and dive into this. I want to dive into this, and let me preface by saying this, and I was going to say this before. I'm of the mind that anybody who serves the Most High in spirit and truth, whose heart is circumcised, because keep in mind, no flesh and blood is going to enter the kingdom of heaven. No flesh or blood is going to enter into the kingdom of heaven. And it doesn't matter where you come from. What matters is where you are. And where you are is your spiritual position, your spiritual identity. Do you keep Torah, right? Do you observe the feast days of the Most High? Are you in covenant with the Most High? Do you profess Mashiach Yahushua as your Redeemer? Now, there's many Israelites who don't do that. That's a Nazarene. That's the Nazarene sect, because there's only really two sects that come out of the first century that survive today. You have Rabbinic Judaism, which comes from Pharisaic Judaism, and then you have Karaite Judaism, which is anti-Talmud, anti-oral tradition, right? And just dealing with the express 5 books of Moses more expressly. And then you have the Nazarene sect that survives today, those who are followers of the man from Nazareth. This is why they're called Nazarenes. And at its root, it is Torah based. It is Torah observant at its root, hands down. But when you deal with what the media and what the social engineers have designed today to keep the status quo, to keep people in place, to keep the power structure the way it is, well, there have been certain dies cast and set that have allowed these flows to continue without disrupting the structure and the order. I want to start with an article that is considered satire, but in the nature of joke and comedy, there's always truth. And I'm not going to read the whole article. It's from the Times of Israel, and I'm going to post these on my blog, and you can actually check them out there. But this article, which comes to us from the Times of Israel by Jim Wald, is called Leaked Report, and it's satire. I'm going to let you all know this. It's satirical. I recognize what it is, but we have to keep in context what satire does as well. Leaked Report. Israel acknowledges Jews, in fact, Khazars. Secret plan for reverse migration to Ukraine. And we know what's going on in Ukraine today. And that's what's so interesting about this article, which was written in 2014. It talks about this revolution that was going to take place in Ukraine, okay? And this war eventually that has popped off in Ukraine. Very interesting and prophetic as well. But this was a editor's note. The blog post is a work of satire. So I'm not unaware of what this article is saying. It was published in 2014 on the eve of Purim, which is the feast dealing with Esther and Mordecai revealing the plot of Haman to carry out genocide with King Ahasuerus, I believe his name was, to take the Israelites out in the land of Persia. And this is what the book of Esther really talks about. And so this article celebrates this spirit, which is wild merrymaking and raucous comedy, with a particular emphasis on poking fun at what is considered anti-Semitism and ignorance. And again, Semitic people are Afro-Asiatics. They're black Asians. They're African people. And they go to their Bantu root, because there's three roots of our society: the Khoisan, the Bantu, and the Twa people. That's the root of everybody. Everybody on earth comes from one of those three people: the Khoisan, the Bantu, or the Twa. Okay? So he says that, let me just go down to here. He said, it's well known that sometime in the 8th to 9th centuries, the Khazars were a warlike Turkic people, converted to Judaism and ruled over a vast domain in what became southern Russia and Ukraine. What happened to them after the Russians destroyed that empire around the 11th century has been a mystery. So it's not a mistake that there's a war going on in this land now that is destroying much of that history and the architecture and structures that are present there, right? Many have speculated that Khazars became the ancestors of Ashkenazi Jews. In fact, the word Ashkenaz comes from a descendant in Genesis 10 of one of Noah's three sons, the elder Japhet, or who is also called Japheth. Japhet, however, is from where the Isles of the Gentiles are said to be found. Japhet had a son named Gomer. Gomer had a son named Ashkenaz. Okay, so this is where Ashkenaz comes from. And we're going to get into that a little more and see where that region, in fact, is. But Arabs have long cited the Khazar hypothesis in attempts to deny a Jewish historical claim to the land of Israel. During the UN debate over Palestine partition, Chaim Weizmann responded sarcastically, "It is very strange all my life that I've been a Jew, felt like a Jew, and now I learn that I'm a Khazar." Okay. In a more folksy vein, Prime Minister Golda Meir famously said, "Khazar Shmazar, there is no Khazar people. I knew no Khazars in Kiev or Milwaukee. Show me these Khazars of whom you speak." Okay. So this is just, the tongue-in-cheek matter here that is done to cast off this attention, right? To divert and to distract, and to use satire to be like, whatever, Khazar Shmazar, right? But when you do the research, when you do your homework and you do your dome work, you can find out matters contrary. And this is not just from speculative research or speculative opinion, right? When we go to the Jewish Encyclopedia, as a matter of fact, when we go to the Jewish Encyclopedia and you look up this man from the 600s whose name was Bulan, King Bulan. This brief article by Herman Rosenthal in the Jewish Encyclopedia says that Bulan was the king of the Khazars, who in 620 embraced Judaism. Joseph Chagan, king of the Khazars, in answer to a letter from Hasdai ibn Shaprut in 960, informs him that 340 years earlier, one of his ancestors, Bulan, became ruler of the Khazars. To him, the Lord appeared in a dream, promising him might and glory. Bulan went by the Deralan road of the Caucasus to Ardabil, the capital of Azerbaijan in Armenia, and gained great victories. He then determined to adopt the Jewish religion. The Byzantine Empire and the Caliph of Ismail each sent to him deputations with valuable presents and wise men versed in religious matters to convert him to their respective religions. Bulan summoned wise men of Israel also and examined them. As both the representatives of the religion of the Nazarene and those of Islam referred to Judaism as the foundation of their faiths, Bulan declared that they, the opponents of Judaism, had themselves made an impartial avowal of the excellence of the Jewish religion, and he therefore accepted it. This is where the origin, the inception of the Khazars under King Bulan come from in their conversion to Judaism. This is from the Jewish Encyclopedia. This is not Brian Michael's opinion. This is not B. Michael's opinion. This is from the Jewish Encyclopedia, okay? And when you go to the Khazars, you can see their early history that they were Armenian. They were dealing with Mongol people. The Khazars first became Armenia with the Basilians in 198. Okay, they are, let's see. The Khagan was the king of the north, the ruler of the Khazirs, and the queen was a Khauton. They, though at first repulsed, they subsequently became important factors in Armenian history for a period of 800 years, driven onward by the nomadic tribes of the steppes and by their own desire for plunder and revenge. They made frequent invasions into Armenia. The latter country was made the battleground in the long struggle between the Romans and the Persians. So this is dealing with the transition of power from the east to the west, okay? This struggle, which finally resulted in the loss by Armenia of her independence, paved the way for the political importance of the Khazars. The conquest of eastern Armenia by the Persians in the 4th century rendered the latter dangerous to the Khazars, who, for their own protection, formed an alliance with the Byzantines. Okay, now you're dealing with an alliance between the Khazars and the Crusaders, if you will, right? The Roman Empire under the Caesars at that time. And also the popes. You're also now dealing with popes. So by this time, you have established the Holy Roman Empire as Constantine in 315 brought forth the state politic of Christendom. So this alliance was renewed from time to time until the final conquest of the Khazars by the Russians. The first aid was rendered to Byzantine Emperor Julian in 363, from where the Julian calendar comes from. About 434, they were for a time tributary to Attila, okay, Attila the Hun. Sidonius Apollonius relates that the Khazars followed the banners of Attila and in 452 fought on the Catalonian fields in the company with the Black Huns and the Alans. Okay, so this is who they are. In the year 669, the Ugarians and the Zabirs freed themselves from the rule of the Obrians, settled between the Don and the Caucasus, and came under dominion of the Khazars. For this reason, the Ugrians had hitherto been called the White or Independent Ugrians, are descended into the chronicles ascribed to Nestor as the Black or Dependent Ugrians. They were no longer governed by their own princes, but were ruled by the kings of the Khazars. In 735, when the Arab leader Mervan moved from Georgia against the Khazars, he attacked the Ugrians also. In 679, the Khazars subjected the Bulgars and extended their sway farther west between the Don and the Dnieper, as far as the headwaters of the Don in the province of Lebedia. Okay, So when you're dealing with this, you're looking at the historical precedents that are establishing the conversion of the Khazars to Judaism. So, some centuries ago, it says again, King Bulan reigned over the Khazars. To him, God appeared in a dream and promised him might and glory. Encouraged by this dream, Bulan went by the road of Darlan to the country of Ardebil, where he gained great victories over the Arabs. The Byzantine emperor and the Caliph of the Ishmaelites sent him envoys with presidents and sages to convert him to their respective religions. Bulan invited also wise men of Israel. We're reading this. This is just a recapitulation. And proceeded to examine them all. As each of the champions believed his religion to be the best, Bulan separately questioned the Mohammedans and the Christians as to which of the other two religions they considered the better. When both gave preference to that of the Jews, the king perceived that it must be the true religion. He therefore adopted it. Jewish Encyclopedia under the Khazars. This is not my opinion. Okay, this is information on chronicles that are related to these people. So when we go further and take a look at this here, the physical anthropology of the Jews. This is by Maurice Fishberg. Okay, Maurice Fishberg was an American anthropologist in the early 20th century. This is from a book that I actually posted today. The book is actually called The Physical... Let's see. It's called The Physical Materials for the Physical Anthropology of the Eastern European Jews, issues 1 through 6. It's actually posted on my Facebook page. You can check it out there. But this article is entitled Physical Anthropology of the Jews this is a chapter from this book by Maurice Fishberg. He says the color of the skin and the eyes is a very important radical trait. Whether pigmentation is a fixed trait, that is, a racial characteristic transmitted by heredity, or is influenced to any extent by climate, altitude, nutrition, and social condition, is a question on which anthropologists are not agreed. Now, there's something called Gloger's Rule or Gloger's Law. Gloger's Rule or Gloger's Law states that the closer you are located to the equator, the more melanin your skin will have, because it requires you to adapt to your environment, and melanin being an element that absorbs sun, right? That allows you to be in the sun and not develop any melanomas, right? Or skin cancers, is what allows you to exist in that equatorial region. It's called Gloger's, Gloger'(S) rule. It's science, okay? The modern school of sociologists have collected considerable evidence tending to show that the phenomena of pigmentation are greatly influenced by climate, which is what Gloger's Law does, etc., while many others adduce strong evidence to the contrary. In our study of the anthropology of the Jews, this is of great importance, Maurice Fishberg writes. If it can be shown that the color of hair and eyes is altered under varying external conditions, irrespective of heredity, we may have a ready explanation of the high percentage of blonde hair and blue eyes among the Jews. On the other hand, if pigmentation is an hereditary racial trait, the 12% of less pigmented Jews must have had their origin in an infusion of non-Semitic, probably Aryan blood. This is a Caucasian writing this in the early 1900s. He said again, if pigmentation is an hereditary racial trait, the 12% of less pigmented Jews must have had their origin in an infusion of non-Semitic, probably Aryan blood, okay, which goes back again to the Khazars. The type of the Jew is dark. Maurice Fishberg continues to write. The type of the Jew is dark. The ancient Hebrews were characterized as having dark hair. Okay, black but comely, right? Dark but lovely. The ideal beauty of Semites has been raven black hair. Jacobs quote a Mishnaic Rabbi Ishmael, who says the sons of Israel are like boxwood, neither black nor white, but between the two, are like what they considered olive complexion. The Talmud appears to use the term shachar, or black, as synonymous with both hair and youth, right? The Mishnah, the Talmud proclaims Israel to be brown, proclaims Israel to be even shachar, black in youth. There is no mention in the Bible nor in the Talmud of the color of the eyes of the ancient Hebrews, but it must be mentioned that according to some authorities on the Hebrew language, there is no equivalent of blue in the Bible or in the Talmud. And I'm just going to leave that there and keep it moving, because these are some things for us to consider that have been written by anthropologists, by historians, okay? Historians. In the Jewish Encyclopedia, we read historians tell us of King Bulan, who converted to Judaism in 620 from the area of Khazaria, which is in the Kiev area. In the Times of Israel, another Times of Israel article, back in 2016, New DNA, headline, New DNA Tech traces origins of Yiddish to Turkey. That's where the Aryans come from, right? From the Turkey area. Genetic data shows speakers of Jewish language come from ancient Silk Road crossroads and may have been traders, Israeli researcher says. His name is Iran El-Haik, Dr. Iran El-Haik, who is a Jew himself. He is Jewish, okay? New DNA analysis technology shows that Yiddish, the historic language of Ashkenazic Jews, may have originated in northeastern Turkey. Now, that's not Afro-Asiatic. That's not what you would call Hamito-Semitic. That's not considered Hebrew, right? They may have originated in northeastern Turkey, according to a study by an Israeli-born researcher. The study by the University of Sheffield's Dr. Iran El-Haik, which was published recently in scientific journal Genome Biology, used a geographic population structure tool to locate the origins of Yiddish speakers' DNA. He says, quote, "We identified 367 people who claim they have two parents who are Ashkenazic Jews, and we divided them into two people whose parents only speak Yiddish, and then everyone else," El-Haik told Wired. The researchers then used the GPS algorithms to analyze participants' DNA and predict their most likely geographical origin. The results, El-Haik said, showed that many of them came from the vicinity of 4 ancient villages in northern Turkey, whose names are conspicuously similar to Ashkenaz. Ashkenaz, Ishkenaz, Ash-Anaz, and Ashkuz, and which are all located near a crossroads of the ancient Silk Road trade route. The researchers have surmised that the language may have been invented by Iranian and Slavic Jews who traded on the Silk Road around the 9th century. We are able to predict the possible ancestral location where Yiddish originated over 1,000 years ago, a question which linguists have debated over for many years. Northeast Turkey is the only place in the world where these names exist, which strongly implies that Yiddish was established around the first millennium at a time when Jewish traders who were plying the Silk Road moved goods from Asia to Europe wanted to keep their monopoly on trade. They did this by inventing Yiddish, a secret language that very few can speak or understand other than Jews. Our findings are in agreement with an alternative theory that suggests Yiddish has Iranian, Turkish, and Slavic origins, and explains why Yiddish contains 251 words for the terms buy and sell. This is what we can expect from a language of experienced merchants. The study suggests that as Jews spread throughout Europe, their language acquired words from other languages in the continent, mainly German. Yiddish is such a wonderful and complex language, which was inappropriately called bad German by both its native and non-native speakers, because the language consists of a made-up German words and a non-German grammar. So it's like a pigeon tongue, okay? It's like a pigeon tongue. But that's very interesting. Consider this DNA study, this search has yielded what this search has yielded. And so just want to keep in that same vein. Their origins, Ashkenazic Jews' mysterious origins unraveled by scientists thanks to DNA. So again, this is an article from phys.org. This is a science website, a legitimate science website. This is by Aaron L. Hake as well. He wrote this article himself. He says, where do Jewish people come from? This is the question that anthropologists, historians, and theologists have studied for millennia. According to mythology, the Judeans descended from three patriarchs, from Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, who are buried in the cave of the patriarchs, or cave of Machpelah, in Hebron, a Palestinian city and World Heritage Site located in the southern bank, West Bank, 19 miles south of Jerusalem. So buried alongside them are said to be Adam and KUAW, or Eve, and the four matriarchs, Sarah, Rivka, Rebecca, Leah, and Rachel, or Rachel. The cave has never been excavated, but on top of it is a relatively modern building, mid-1st century, which Herod the Great built likely to honor his ancestors. Herod was an Edomite. He was a Hebrew Edomite, not a Hebrew Israelite. Okay, he was considered the king of the Jews during the age of Yehoshua ben Yosef, who the world knows erroneously as Jesus Christ. For a more scientific take on the Jewish origin debate, recent DNA analysis of Ashkenazic Jews, a Jewish ethnic group, revealed that their maternal line is European. It has also been found that their DNA only has 3% ancient ancestry, which links them with the Eastern Mediterranean, or the Levant, also known as the Middle East, namely Israel, Lebanon, parts of Syria, and Western Jordan. That is called the Levant. Okay, Middle East is a political term during World War I that the, what do they call that? The Balkanization of that era due to the Berlin Conference, which carved up Africa and carved up the Middle East and parts of Near Eastern Asia. They Balkanized it. That's what you call that, okay? This is the part of the world that Jewish people are said to have originally come from, according to the Old Testament. But 3% is a minuscule amount and similar to what modern Europeans as a whole share with Neanderthals. So given that the genetic ancestry link is so low, Ashkenazic Jews' most recent ancestors must be from somewhere else, he says. To understand why this is the case, we need to go back in time to look at where these other ancestors came from. It starts in Persia, modern-day Iran, during the 6th century. This is where most of the world Jews were living at this time. The tolerance of the Persians encouraged the Jews to adopt Persian names, words, traditions, and religious practices, and they climb up the social ladder, gaining a monopoly on trade. They also converted other people who were living along the Black Sea to their Jewish faith. This helped to expand their global network. Among these converts were the Alans, we just mentioned them earlier, Iranian nomadic pastoral people, Greeks and Slavs who resided along the southern shores of the Black Sea. Upon conversion, they translated the Old Testament into Greek, built synagogues, and continued expanding the Jewish trade network. So this also explains how Paul could go into these areas, into Ephesus, into Philippi, into Colossus, into Galatia, into Corinth, right? And interact with these people and bring the good news, because there were being converted people, and they talked about the converts who were there, okay? So these Jews adopted the name Ashkenaz, and the DNA of Ashkenazic Jews can be traced to ancient Ashkenaz, an intersection of trade routes in eastern Turkey, okay? So we know that at that time, these Jews adopted the name Ashkenaz. They also acquired unique Asian mutations on their Y chromosome. This is where another important group of people in our story come into play. They are called the Gok Turks. During the 6th century, which is the 500s, these nomadic people were ruled by a Siberian Turkic tribe called the Ashina. They were forced by the Chinese Tang Empire, who were in power in China at the time, to migrate westwards towards the Black Sea. Thanks to their organizational and military skills, the Ashina united many tribes in this area, and a new empire called the Khazar Khaganate was born. Offering freedom of worship and taxing trade, these people quickly rose to power. The Asian group of these DNA mutations found in Ashkenazic Jews likely originated from the Ashina elite or other Khazar clans who converted from shamanism to Judaism. Converts. This means that the Ashina and core Khazar clans were absorbed by the Ashkenazic Jews. It was also around this time that the Jewish elite adopted many Slavic customs. And based on my previous research, I would suggest that Yiddish was developed as a secret language to assist in trade. So I'm just going to leave that right there. That's a very interesting article because what we're dealing with are the roots of this stuff. And these are not, again, my opinions. This is research, scientific genetic research with historical precedents and historical research that yields these particular findings. Because this is a response, again, to what the movie is making in terms of understanding the African origins of Israel. And we're going to get to that very shortly in dealing with this matter here. So when we look at Israel and we consider what part of the world Israel is in, one thing we have to ask ourselves, looking at the geography of Israel and its location to Africa, proximity to Africa, it sits on the northern border of Egypt. It is literally the northernmost country at the northernmost border of Egypt. Okay? So the question is, why is Israel not a part of Africa? Yet it sits on the African tectonic plate. This is a article from Opera News. Opera News is out of Africa. Israel is located, the article starts out saying. This is by Enoch KUAW Yator, who wrote this 6 months ago. He starts out the article by saying Israel is located on the African tectonic plate. The Great Rift Valley runs through eastern Africa as far south as Mozambique and Israel in the north. The Great Rift Valley goes from Mozambique, really beyond Israel, into Syria. It goes from Egypt. You can go to Israel by land via the Gaza Strip or the southeastern side of the border, namely the Gulf of Aqaba. So you can go from Egypt into Israel, literally. The country of Israel is located at the crossroads of 3 continents. This is why it's such a hotly contested real estate land, because it is the nexus of these 3 major continents: Africa, Asia, and Eurasia. Europe is still not a continent. Let's be clear about that. Europe is not a continent because the continent is surrounded by 4 sides of water. Europe is not. Russia, which is Asia, is on the backside of Eurasia. Because it is so close to Egypt, it may cause some people to debate or be perplexed. However, the country is officially located in Asia, he says. I would argue that. I would say it's actually in Africa. That is my opinion. I will make that clearly stated, but it is on the African tectonic plate. It's hard to understand why Israel is included in Madagascar. Hundreds of kilometers separate Israel and Madagascar due to a big body of water. Although Israel is physically located on the African plate, this does not imply that it is a member of the African continent, which is completely counterintuitive. Like, if it's on the African plate, but it's not a part of the African continent, how does that make sense? Right? Israel and other Western Asian countries can also be located there due to their placement on Africa's continental plate. Now, keep in mind, Canaan, who is the quote-unquote original inhabitants of that land, but we'll get to who those people were. They were called Natufians, actually. Natufians are actually Bantus who migrated up the west coast of Africa and actually ended up way over in the east part of Africa in the Levant. Natufian people, okay? But Israel, just wanted to bring that article out, is on the African tectonic plate, which lets you know, continentally speaking, Israel is on the African continent, okay? So we see maps, and again, when we go back and we understand the Balfour Conference, right, and we understand what took place, the Berlin Conference. The Balfour Conference is what gives you 1948. But the Berlin Conference during World War I is what gives us the Middle East. It's what gives us the national borders of Africa as well. And so these things are political movements to really keep people under the influence of the social engineers and the world controllers who are in control to this day still. So this next article comes from I-24 News, which is an Israeli publication. This was printed up on January 10th of 2022. It says, Israel unprepared for the next massive earthquake. That's a very profound statement in many ways. But it says approximately 100 years, every 100 years, we, Israel, have a very strong earthquake in Israel. We are expecting a big one. Israeli national security experts predict that a massive earthquake will hit Israel in the coming years, and some say that the country is not prepared for the potential destruction. The last major earthquake to shake Israel struck in 1927, Over 500 people died and more than 300 buildings collapsed when the 6.5 Richter scale quake hit the Dead Sea Valley. Today, if a same-sized earthquake hits Israel, experts warn that it would be disastrous. Approximately every 100 years, we have a very strong earthquake in Israel, so we're expecting a big one to come. The reason I'm reading this is because now this is where it gets interesting. Israel is located on the border of the African tectonic plate, where many quakes occur, stretching from the Red Sea and the Gulf of Eilat of southern Israel through the Jordan Valley to Turkey in the north. So again, this article from Israel even professes that Israel is located on the border of the African tectonic plate. Okay, which lets you know it is a part of the African continent. Once again, let's keep it moving. This is a article from a rabbi. His name is Rabbi Armin Langer. It's from Evolve Groundbreaking Jewish Conversations. This article was written on December 31st in 2020. He says being white is not the Jewish norm. This is a rabbi, a Ashkenazi rabbi, who says being white is not the Jewish norm, how the Mishnah can help us deconstruct a white normative approach to Judaism. So we've normalized this. And this took place during World War II. This is what World War II was really all about. It was to shift the face of world Jewry from the darker hued Jew to the lighter Jew, right? From the melanated Jew to the less melanated Jew, so to speak. Because prior to World War II, many Jews were thought of as being swarthy. You would call them ruddy, right? Ruddy people. This is what David was considered ruddy. The word Edom or the word Adam mean red. But that is what that boxcar color is like. That's the tone, right? Your red bone, right? So I'm like a boxwood color. I'm like boxwood. If you look at my complexion would be considered boxwood. Okay, yellow. What's up, yellow man? That's what my baby call me all the time. You so bright, you so yellow, right? So this is what boxwood color looks like. So he goes on to say, while white Jews may take for granted that ancient Jews look like them, the evidence is otherwise. The evidence is otherwise. As white Jews are trying to challenge racism within the Jewish community and with wider American society, many are looking for guidance in traditional Jewish sources. However, there are not many places in the early rabbinic literature that can help us deconstruct such biases. The Mishnaic tractate Nigaim, or blemishes, offers one of the few insights into the rabbinic conceptions of race, or rather, distinct human skin colors. We weren't dealing with race at that time. There was really, you had Goy and you had Yahudi, right? You had a Gentile and you had an Israelite. Those are the only distinctions of race, really. Anybody who was not an Israelite was considered a Gentile, okay? According to scripture, according to the Hebraic mind. The tractate itself deals with various forms of zara'at, or what's known as leprosy, or leprosy-like disease mentioned in the Torah portions Tazria and Metzorah. In this context, Nigaim 2:1 explains that the bright zara'at spot in a Germani, okay, which is a German or a Caucasian, appears as dull white, and the dull white spot in a Cushi means a person who is melanated, appears as bright white. Rabbi Ishmael says that the children of Israel are like boxwood, neither black nor white, but of an intermediate shade. Brown, yellow bone, right? Red bone. On one level, the Mishnah deals with a purely clinical challenge, how to diagnose Zara'at on various shades of skin, yet can it also help us better understand our ancestors' relationship to the modern concept of race, a category they didn't share. It didn't matter, right? It didn't matter. When you deal with Philo was a convert. Philo was a Caucasian, but Philo became one of the greatest commentators of Torah that we know. Onkelos as well, right? But then also you deal with like the likes of Ruth. Ruth was a Moabite, right? You deal with Zipporah, the wife of Moshe, she was a Cush, she was an Ethiopian, right? From Midian. And so it never really mattered. The truth of the matter is race is a economic, political, and social tool of pseudoscience meant to keep structures in power. That's what race is about, right? Because what we're dealing with truly is culture. That's what really comes down to things, culture. But what has happened is because race has become so prominent and so focused upon, right, that people have been misled to think that one race is better than another. It has nothing to do. This is like what Dr. King said. It has nothing to do about the color of your skin, but the content of your character. That's what this is about. This is why Paul says in Romans 2, a true Yahudi is one who is so inwardly and not after the flesh. This is what we have to understand. But what has happened is this has become a major issue. The Negro, the so-called African American, cannot be Hebrew, when in fact history proves and suggests more so that Shem was a Negro, from where the Semitic people come from. This is what it suggests, because again, keeping in mind, the tectonic plate that Africa sits on is Africa. Keep in mind, Gloger's rule tells us if you're in that region, you must have more melanated complexion to protect you in the climate which you stand, okay? But again, the specific terms in this passage from Negaim 22:1 are interesting. The Mishnah states that a Jew's skin is unlike that of a Germani. It's not like a Germani. This term is probably a loan word from the Latin Germanus and refers to a member of the Germanic tribe, which is where Ashkenaz comes from. Okay, the word occurs in the Mishnah only in the above cited paragraph. In the Jerusalem Talmud, there is no mention of Germani, where it stands for a white person who was enslaved by Rabbi Yodan, a sage who lived in the first half of the 4th century in the land of Israel. Apparently, slavery at this point in Jewish history was not based on race. The rabbinic sages seem to have followed the Roman model of slavery that did not base slavery on race either. That only comes into matter with the transatlantic slave trade. Actually, most of those enslaved by the Romans were white, members of the Germanic and Slavic tribes. The Slavic tribes are where the word, in fact, slave comes from. It's an Eastern European word, okay? The word Slavic itself was borrowed from the Greek sklavos, or slave. The Midrashic literature also acknowledges the existence of white and black slaves alike. This decoupling of the skin color from social hierarchy supports the claim that Mediterranean people of late antiquity did have a different concept of race than we do, if they had any at all. This evidence also indicates that the fusion of skin color and social hierarchies is socially constructed and subject to change. But the Mishnah does not only differentiate Jews from the members of the Germanic tribes, it also states that a Jew's skin is unlike that of a Cushi or Kushi. The word denotes a person from Kush, a kingdom that centered along the Nile Valley in present-day Sudan to the south of Egypt. So that is like the blue-black, Nubian black people there. So it distinguishes the Nubians and also the Germani. So Israel is in between that, okay? Israel is considered to be more light-skinned, okay? But melanated, okay? Let's go on to this next article from a periodical called Haaretz out of Israel. Just going to read the caption and the headline and the caption. It says, how white were the Israelites? And this was written back in 2008. How white were the Israelites? Facial reconstruction may be surprising. Israeli anthropologist claims the subjects of the kingdom of Judea looked more like black Africans. This is from Haaretz out of Israel. In 2008, November 14, almost a year to the date, this article states that an anthropologist out of Israel claims that the people of Judea, which concluded where Jerusalem and where the Messiah lived, looked more like black Africans. This is out of Haaretz, okay? We read Sephariah, which deals with, Negaim 2:1, which dealt with actually the skin complexion of Israel, more like boxwood, okay? And so I want to close with this article here that deals with the Bantu origin of Hebrew Israelites. And just kind of want to read the summary of this matter and get into the summation before we close out. In summary, he says, we know that the children of Israel, according to the Bible, lived in the land of Egypt for a few generations before the famous Exodus under Moses' leadership. The body of knowledge that provided the success of the Bantu expansion, advanced metallurgy, animal husbandry, architecture, carpentry, agriculture, so on and so forth, was inherited by these Bantu from their Israelite ancestors during their long residence in Egypt. The Israelites gathered a lot of skills during their time in Egypt. They mastered these technical skills because they were forced to utilize their talents to build all of Egypt. However, moreover, they were threatened with death or the death of their children if they did not perform to standard in the work of constructing Egypt. The threat of losing your life or your child is definitely motivation and incentive to master any and all tasks placed before you and yourself. Under the pain of death, the Israelites worked hard at their crafts to avoid punishment. Evidence can be placed clearly to demonstrate in the Bantu expansion, which will connect to other places in the world connected to the Bantu expansion that also hold evidence of the same connections to Egyptian knowledge as well. Through the understanding of the Israelites' identification with the Bantu and the related people of Africa and their long residence in ancient Egypt, it will become much easier for us to make logical and historically accurate connections between the biblical records of the Israelites and modern secular, historical, archaeological, and anthropological research. So they have a connection to a Bantu, not only in language, which again, Afro-Asiatic language of Hebrew goes back in root to the Bantu tongue. But not only that, also the skills and the trade and some even the cultural practices are also connected to that as well. So that was a matter of really just presenting this information to you all for the sake of understanding what Kanye and what Kyrie are speaking about. And he's not disparaging. They're not disparaging the Ashkenazic Jew at all, because there are very righteous Ashkenazic Jews as well who are observant of Torah scrupulously. And that's what the measure of this really comes down to, is if you serve the creator of heaven, earth, sea, and all that is in them in spirit and truth. But what happens in our society, because race has become so conventionally focused upon, is that we make things a matter of race. We make things a matter of black, white, right? But when we look at the historicity of the truth of the matter, we see where it has its inceptions and who these people are at root. And it's just a matter of setting the record straight. It doesn't like eliminate people from being present and coming in at certain times in history. It doesn't mean that you can't be a part of this great and mighty covenant and kingdom. It doesn't mean that. But what it has to be done is we have to set the record straight. We have to be able to put things in place because the world is out of order. And one of the ways to get the world back in order is to get the people of the kingdom back in order. All right. So that's what I wanted to present in Israelite Paradigmatics. I'm B. Michael, your host. We'll be back in a couple of weeks. And I'm going to carry this out a little more because this is just the surface. I just wanted to skim the surface on this stuff. We can uncover some more. These articles will be placed on my blog, shiftingparadigms.wordpress.com. No vowels in the word shifting paradigms. And a Z, of course, on the end of paradigm. So you can check us out there. But this is, again, Shifting Paradigms. I'm your host, B. Michael, here on KUAW, Knowledge, Understanding, and Wisdom Radio. Thank you for tuning in. We'll see you in a couple of weeks, most high willing. Peace and power. Shalom, shalom.